I'm Esther Dillard on the Black Information Network, chatting with writers and authors who offer an added perspective for our listeners. This is Color Between the Lines. And in this segment of Color Between the Lines, you get a chance to hear about the first African-American commercial pilot in the United States. His name is David Harris. You see, back in 1964, during the height of the civil rights movement, black men didn't fly commercial jets. It was only around 60 years ago, segregation in this country was the norm in parts of the United States. The book is called Segregated Skies, David Harris's trailblazing journey to rise above racial barriers. We get a chance to talk to the author, Michael Kottman. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and former White House political correspondent. He is the current editor for the NBC Universal News Group's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team, NBC News, MSNBC, CNBC. He was formerly editorial manager for NBC BLK and worked as a political reporter for The Washington Post and Miami Herald. His past books include Shackles from the Deep and Million Man March. It's my pleasure to welcome Michael Kottman to the BIN.
Thank you, Esther, for having me on the program. I really appreciate it. Look forward to this discussion.
All right. I enjoyed this book. I think many of us really take it for granted when you look in the cockpit and see a black pilot or pilot of color or woman of color. You really don't really think about what it may have been like for that first person of color to cross the line. How did you come across David's story?
That's a good point, Esther. And thank you. I met David several years ago, quite by accident. I was visiting family and friends in Atlanta, and I gave a call to an old friend, Lynn May, who's in the book, who's a former PBS anchor, who is David's ex-wife.
Wow.
She began to talk to me about David, and she asked me just a quick question. Do you know about David Harris? And I said, no, I don't. Tell me a little bit about him. And she begins to tell me about how David was the first black pilot hired by a major commercial airline, the racial obstacles that he experienced on his journey. And she said, maybe you might want to give David a call. It might be a good magazine story for you, or just a connection to a good guy. She said, you're a good guy. He's a good guy. I like connecting good people, right? So that's what I gave him a call. And I figured we'd talk 10, 15 minutes just to get to know each other and maybe a follow-up at some other point. I knew he was a nice guy. We talked for more than 2 hours.
Wow.
His story was just incredible. It was inspiring. It was uplifting. He's been through a lot. Yeah. And so I knew then that this was something special. So long story short, I picked up the phone. First person I called was Lynn to thank her. I called my agent. And then I called my editor at National Geographic, shared some thoughts about David with her. They immediately embraced this idea with what I call thoughtful enthusiasm.
Yeah.
It's probably the best way I can describe it. And they were excited about it. And pardon the pun, but the rest is history.
Yeah. Wow. It seems like when you find those kind of stories, you just want to, grab them up and share them with everyone because they make you feel so good. And then you want to share it with so many people. I guess what convinced you about this story that you really wanted to write a book instead of perhaps produce a documentary or something like that because you worked with NBC?
Mm-hmm. I would say a couple things, Esther. First of all, I found his story to be inspirational. It's inspiring, it's uplifting, it's motivational. And I thought if I'm writing this book for young readers, I'm thinking, what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway from this? And as I began to talk to David and interview him, and keep in mind, I spent 2 years with David. He lives in Atlanta now, but previously he lived in South Carolina, so I was back and forth to South Carolina a bit. And in talking to him, listening to his stories about going to speak with kids, this was before COVID, obviously, at schools, to talk to them about careers in aviation, watching him put together these little paper airplanes was kind of cute, to teach them about the physics of flight. I thought about how he managed adversity. And with all the discrimination and some of the obstacles that he faced, the core of this book is also about a man who was able to sidestep this adversity and continue to keep focused, to keep his eyes on the prize, to accomplish his goal of being a pilot, and not letting anything stop him, and not giving up. Mm-hmm. And I thought this is a story, that young people need to know about, and life lessons to learn. And so I thought, what better way to get this point across than to share this story of David Harris.
What would you say was the most difficult part about writing the book?
That's a good question. Listening to some of the racist experiences that David had as a humble man who just wanted Esther to be in a career in aviation, raise a family, buy a house, put food on the table, provide for his kids. That's all he wanted.
Yeah,
and that's what we all want, right? That's what we all want in life. To have healthy kids and to raise them and to be productive citizens. So to hear the pain in his voice when he experienced some of this racism, and not knowing exactly during that time, and let's put some of this into historical context. Remember, this was 1964, height of the Civil Rights Movement, right? Civil unrest. Lyndon Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act, to prevent discrimination of our people. This was a tough time for a black man to step in, to try to join a major airline and step into a cockpit of an airline in a major corporation where he had no role models.
Right.
He didn't have any other black pilots to turn to make a phone call. How do I do this, man? How do I move forward? What should I do? He didn't have any of that. So he had to navigate that himself. That was, in some ways, it was sort of tough for me to hear because, I felt for him. I didn't have to go through it myself, obviously. I didn't come up through in that generation. But I understood it, and I'm still a black man in America, and I understand what's going on right here today. And this book is so timely. It's a great time to come out to have these conversations. David worked hard at American Airlines to bring other black pilots into the airline. So yeah. So if you ask me, what's tough? Yeah. One quick story to illustrate that, if you will, if I may. 1968, I believe, David's landing a plane at National Airport in D.C. To the left, he looks out his window. He's a captain, so he's in what he calls, of course, the left seat, and he sees fires in the distance. He's told, I believe, to the air traffic control tower, or he may have known it anyway, that when he landed, that those fires were because of the racial disturbance riots in D.C.
Right.
And so, what's his first mission? To land this plane with people aboard. I'm saying 100, 150, whatever it was at the time. Right. Safely. That's it, right? Well, he's next to a pilot who he's never flown with before, who was white. And I need to say parenthetically, I guess I should say that David's role model, one of his big role models ever in life, is Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right.
Who he holds as high esteem as we all do. With his pilot next to him, who's never flown with before, and white, started making disparaging comments about Dr. King, and went a step further and implied that he was comfortable with him being assassinated.
Right.
So here's David. I mean, think about this. You already have to navigate landing a plane, right? And now you've got this, what he calls a racist sitting next to me in the co-pilot seat, using, disparaging language about Dr. King. So that was a hard story to hear, right? And he had choice words for the pilot. He never flew with him again. He talked to management, I believe, about it, and but he moved on. He moved on from it. And he was.
And I noticed in the book that when you relayed that story, he had such restraint. To have that, such restraint and such poise in terms of being able to handle it and just keep moving forward was, I think, is a testament to, how things were different, much different than today. I agree.
I agree. Restraint is the right word. And he said that. And he thought about it in his mind. What do I do? Do I yell at the guy? Do I grab him? There are a number of ways he could have handled that situation, right? A number of ways. Everyone would not have handled it the way David did. But I think that it is a testament to his character, to his resolve, the way he works through conflict. I think that's a lesson in this book for young readers. And everything doesn't have to be that dramatic, right? Every obstacle in life doesn't have to be as dramatic as the one I just described with David in the cockpit. But the core message is how to get past some of these obstacles and adversity and keep moving forward and remain positive.
I notice also with other areas in that story that you wove through the details of David's story and then historical nuggets of civil rights movement throughout. Was that difficult to balance so you didn't get off track?
That's a good question. I wouldn't use the word difficult. I would say I had to constantly remain focused.
Yeah.
Because there's the civil rights movement and the tense time in the 1960s during the time when David was applying for these jobs with American Airlines had to be a part of this. Is as much important, should have as much importance in the book as David's career. And David talked about that, and he says that I'm happy that you were able to put this in the context in which I was living at the time, because it was very difficult. And so to answer your question, I had to stay focused with it just to make sure, because I didn't want Esther to be a section of David's life and then a section on what was going on during the 1960s.
Right.
It had to be weaved in, and it took some work. I'm not going to kid you. I mean, it did, and I enjoyed every single minute of it.
It was a nice balance.
It took work, and I have a fantastic editor. The National Geographic.
I also like how you wove some of his wife's story into the book. That moment that stuck out in my mind was the part where she wrote about how she had this pretty white skirt on and she tried to move quickly by a group of very hostile white men, and then one of them spat on the back of her outfit. I could actually feel the tension in the page. Why did you think it was really important to share that in David's story?
So it was so important, and it spit tobacco juice, and she took the dress off and went home, and she burned it. And she never told David that story until years later, until the three of us talked about the book.
Wow.
And David was so upset about hearing it because he had heard it for the first time, and he asked Lynn, "Why didn't you tell me at the time?" And she says, "Because I didn't want you to get hurt, because you would have gone back and confronted these guys.
Yeah.
And who knows what would have happened. And you were studying to become a pilot. You had a lot on your plate. I thought that was powerful. The reason why you asked a very good question, Esther, is because Lynn is an essential part of this book. She's an essential part of David's life and David's story. She was his wife. She was his confidant. David couldn't talk to anybody else. Lynn was his best friend. She helped guide David's career as much as David guided his career. And David will tell you that. Without Lynn, there's no me.
Wow.
So there's no way I could have left Lynn out of this book. She had to be a pivotal part of this story. And she's an incredible woman in her own right. She's got her own story to tell.
Yeah, I wanted to hear more about her story in the story, but I knew it was about him too. But
I hear you.
What
do you feel? I have a question. I mean, you raised an excellent point. Do you feel that Lynn came through in this? In
she
the book?
did. I just wanted to hear more about what was
Good.
her
Okay.
life like, and that's why it kind of felt like to me, maybe like a documentary or a story where you could see, visually see some of the drama that happens, like a historical drama or a documentary. That's why I asked about whether you had thought about making it a documentary or something else.
We are thinking about that. I'm glad you brought that up. The second part of your question, though, which is, I think, such an important question, and you were the first, nobody's asked me this before, so thank you for this in all seriousness. I didn't want Esther to people to pick up this book and think that this is just about a man who did everything on his own.
Right.
That he didn't have a strong, formidable, smart, driven woman next to him. Mm-hmm. And people say behind him. I'm saying next to him.
Right.
Helping him in every stage of his career and life. And so that would have done a disservice. It would have been inaccurate. Not to have Lynn as an important role in there. And I know I took too much time answering that question, but I thought it was really important. So thanks for asking.
What did you personally learn from this journey in writing you didn't know from the start? Were there any surprises for yourself?
I'm not sure there's anything I would say that I learned that I didn't know, but I will tell you this. I was reminded of why I do what I do and why I want to continue to do what I do. And that is telling uplifting, inspirational stories about our people and stories that people may not know about, in order to inspire young readers across the country and around the world. And David's story sort of validated, if you will, what I continue to do and what I love to do. And I think what's important to do as a journalist for me. And everybody has their calling. And I don't believe it was a coincidence that I happened to, meet with Lynn in her living room to just have a discussion. And then David ends up her ex-husband. Mm-hmm. I think we're guided to projects. I think we're steered to projects.
Yeah.
And I was steered to this one.
What do you hope your readers will get after they pick up this book?
I hope that young people, when they pick up this book, that they'll learn, that they'll think about, number one, not giving up on dreams. David had this big dream of being a pilot. I think he originally wanted to be a veterinarian, actually. I think the pilot was plan B. But he wanted to be an aviator. And again, no role models. These young people now have role models to choose from, to look at, to see people who look like them. Even all kids, not just kids of color, but all kids can look at David. David's an American hero in my mind. So I hope that they take away, and maybe their kids think, well, I can't achieve this. I can't fly. But maybe they, read David's story and decide, you know what, I can fly too. And maybe it's not aviation. Maybe they want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a talk show host or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. That they were able to reach their goals and able to find ways, again, to set aside adversity and become successful.
That's Michael Kottman, author of Segregated Skies, David Harris's trailblazing journey to rise above racial barriers. I'm Esther Dillard with Color Between the Lines on the Black Information Network.